Okay, I think we can start now. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be speaking here today in front of you all. So I'm going to talk about the evolution of the Remix framework and provide a guide on how to build resilient and performant apps with it. So how many of you have used Remix? Okay, actually, some people have used it. That's nice. Have you used React Router, though? Probably a lot of people, yeah. So we're going to see why that matters later. First, my name is Aurora. I'm from Norway, currently living and working in Oslo. I'm a front-end developer, Microsoft MVP in web tech, and a React educator. And my primary role is a consultant at Crayon Consulting, but I'm also the React certification lead at Certificates Dev, which is a certification platform. And in my primary role, I work a lot with the Next.js app router and use a lot of React 19 and server components, but I also like Remix. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's get right to it. Remix is a React-based full-stack web framework, or meta framework. And that means a framework around another framework, in this case, React. And Remix is one of the biggest React meta frameworks alongside with Next.js, but lesser known, typically. And if you want to get like a quick overview of the main selling points, the website had like this really nice like scrolling experience, which really like gives the main selling points here, which it's nice. It's a nice experience, so try this out. Yeah. Anyway, Remix was released in 2020 and was acquired by Shopify in 2022. And it's really easy to get into and start building apps in a way that feels native to the web. And it aims to allow you to focus on the user interface and work back through web standards to deliver fast and resilient user experiences. And way back when it was released, it presented solutions to problems that were not yet solved in other frameworks. By now, a lot of these features are already very standard in most frameworks, and also we see it coming in React 19. For example, their approach to nested routing was like a big deal when this framework came out. Is the idea that you couple segments of the URL to the component hierarchy and data. So their nested routing was inspired by the routing system in Ember.js in 2014, where the Ember team realized that in nearly every case, segments of the URL determine the layouts to render the page and the data dependencies of those layouts. Remix is actually made by the same people who created and maintained React Router, which is a library that probably a lot of us have used at some point in our career. And Remix uses React Router as its biggest dependency, after React itself. So let's talk a bit more about React Router. So for 10 years, React Router had remained one of the most widely used dependencies in the React ecosystem. And that's clear just by looking at the number of public GitHub repositories using React Router. When I took this screenshot, it was 10.7 million. It's probably even more than that now. And Shopify itself also heavily depends on React Router. So they have like a 5 million line application running on React Router at the very core of the business. And that's just one example. So React Router is great, but the team wanted to provide more features to allow developers to build better websites with React and scale. Features like automatic code splitting, simplified data loading, form actions, pending states, optimistic UI, and such. And server rendering. And these are features that we commonly see in meta frameworks. For example, Next.js has this stuff, right? And that's why Remix was created. Another piece of the story here is Vite. So Vite is a front-end tool that provides optimized builds and fast dev experience. How many people have used Vite here? Yeah, Vite's great, right? So it was created for Vue.js originally, but now it's used by almost everyone. For example, Svelte and uses Vite. And it's been rising in popularity the past couple of years, and already long ago replaced Create React App as the recommended way to create React applications. And Create React App was already unmaintained for a long time, and just recently was deprecated as well. So then in 2023, Remix decided to join in and switch from their classic compiler to Vite. And this allowed them to improve and extend Remix's bundling capabilities and open up Remix to even more users. And they also added new features like spa mode for client-only apps. And as a developer, this meant switching to a Vite config instead of and enabling a Remix plugin. So this was a big step for Remix. So then we had this, React Router plus a Vite plugin. And the Remix team still wanted to convince more developers using React Router to switch to Remix for all of its great features, like the code splitting and optimistic UI and form actions. But in most cases, migrating to something is not an option, or even convincing your boss that you're going to migrate to something. So what they realized is that the gap between React Router and Remix was very small. Remix is just React Router plus a Vite plugin, so why not go from the other way and start from the router? So all of this led up to ReactConf 2024, when the creator of React Router, Ryan Florence, announced the future of Remix. It would continue as React Router v7. Because the team wanted that 5 million line Shopify app, those 10+ million React Router projects on GitHub, and everyone else to be able to easily upgrade and take advantage of the latest and greatest that React has to offer. They wanted creating a React app to be easy and scalable. So for years, the features of Remix had already been put into React Router anyway, until this point where they merged. And React Router v7 opens up a lot of possibilities for React developers. It actually allows us to adopt the meta framework in our existing apps without rebuilding, which is incredible. So to summarize, you came here to learn about Remix, an innovative meta framework for React. And you might have thought that React Router is just React Router. Well, not anymore. React Router is now also a full-stack framework, including all Remix's features. And this talk is now about React Router v7, so welcome. The merge of React Router and Remix is especially important now that Create React App is deprecated, and apps that have been using it really need to migrate away from it. And React Router is one of the easiest and recommended ways to do that, because React Router v7 is just a Vite plus a router. It's a lot easier than like a Next.js migration, where you're almost rewriting a lot of your application code. And this is what is one of the most important things for an existing app to even have a real shot at adopting a full-stack meta framework, and what makes the release of React Router v7 so significant for regular developers like us. And you can also slowly, incrementally adopt more features from React Router v7 based on your need, because as a result of the merge with Remix, React Router now has a couple different modes. So these are the 3 primary ways or modes that you can use React Router in your app. And the features available in each mode are additive, so moving from declarative to data to framework mode simply adds more features at the cost of architectural control. So you can pick your mode based on how much control or how much help you want from React Router. So declarative mode is probably the one you're most familiar with when using React Router in a single-page app. It enables the basic routing features with browser router, matching URLs to components, navigating around the app, and then providing active states with APIs like link and use navigate, use location and such. What we've been using for so many years already. But then by moving the route configuration outside of React rendering, data mode adds data loading, actions, pending states, and more APIs like loader, action, and use fetcher. And then finally, framework mode is wrapped with a Vite plugin, which provides the full React Router experience, including everything Remix had, like intelligent code splitting, SSR, plus it adds a type-safe route module API, like a utility that you wrap around your links, and then it also enables static rendering. There's actually 3 rendering strategies in React Router v7. We have client-side rendering, of course, server-side rendering, and also static pre-rendering. And then you can configure this in your config file. And routes are always client-side rendered as the user navigates around the app. So if you're looking to build a single-page app, you can just disable server rendering and be in spa mode. And this is just enabling developers to manipulate the browser history stack without making a document request to the server. Then we have server-side rendering, which requires a deployment that supports it, and you enable that with SSR true. And then pre-rendering is a build time operation that generates static HTML for a list of URLs. This is useful for SEO and performance, and especially for deployments without server rendering. So let's move on to the architecture of Remix, or now React Router v7, which I'm going to have to be saying a lot of times, and it's very long. So that thing should really have a shorter name. And I'm going to be focusing on the framework mode and those features, since those are the things that were unique to Remix originally and not previously something we could use in React Router, and is now what allows us to build full-stack apps. So after this technical background, I'm going to live demo everything, but just try to follow along this. So React Router in framework mode is 4 things. It's a compiler, a server-side HTTP handler, a server framework, and a browser framework. And everything starts with the compiler with React Router build. So using Vite, this creates a few things. First, a server-side HTTP handler that includes all routes and modules together to be able to render on the server and handle any server-side requests for resources. Then, a browser build. This includes automatic code splitting by route and anything needed to run an application in the browser. And an asset manifest. So both the client and the server use this manifest to know the entire dependency graph. And that's useful for preloading resources in the initial server render and for prefetching on client-side navigation. So with these artifacts, the application can be deployed to any hosting service that runs JavaScript. And while React Router runs on the server, it's not actually a server. It's just a handler that is given to the actual JavaScript server. And it's built on the Web Fetch API. This enables React Router to run in any Node.js server like Vercel, Netlify, or non-Node.js environments like Cloudflare Workers and Deploy. And if you're familiar with server-side MVC frameworks like Rails and Laravel, React Router in framework mode is the view and the controller, but then leaves the model up to you. And most server frameworks are model-focused. A controller can manage multiple URLs for a single model, whereas React Router is UI-focused. So routes can handle an entire URL or just a segment of the URL. And instead of having a split between the view and the controller, what's called a route module can take on both responsibilities. Route modules are the foundation of the React Router framework, and they define automatic code splitting, data loading, actions, revalidation, error boundaries, everything. We can think of them like this. It has 3 exports, a loader, an action, and a default, which would be the component. So more often than not, a remix route module can contain both the UI and the interactions with the models in the same file, which leads to a very nice developer experience, and is why a lot of developers like to work with Remix or React Router v7. You can actually use React Router as just a server-side framework without using any browser JavaScript at all, because the route conventions for data loading with a loader, mutations with action and forms, and components that render at URLs can provide the core feature set for a lot of web projects. We can look at this example of a route module, nodes TSX. Let's pretend that we have a list of nodes and a form to add a new node. The form can also display validation errors. This route module has 3 exports: a loader, a default, which is the component, and an action. So route files export a loader function that provide data to the route component on GET requests. So when the user navigates to a matching route, the data is first loaded and then the page is rendered. And loaders only run on the server. And since loaders only run on the server, we can, in this nodes TSX route module, simply query the database through an ORM here to find many nodes and return them. The default export of the route file is the component that renders for the route. It runs both on the server during SSR and then on the client. And when the component is rendered, it is provided some props. The most important are the loader data, which is the data returned from the loader function in this route module, and action data, the data returned from an action function on the route module. In our example, we are mapping the nodes from the database to links. Then we are rendering a form with inputs, and we are passed a action data prop to map potential errors to error messages. We can submit to the action of the route with the form, and then the action data is the return of the action. The actions only run on the server and can handle post, put, patch, and delete, and even return data to the component, as in our example with action data. So when a form is submitted for a route module, the action matching the route's form action is called. In this example again, the action is receiving a request from the component. The values in the form fields will be available on the standard request form data API. And note the naming of the attribute. The name attribute on the inputs is coupled to the form data, that get field name getter. And then the form data can be validated and conditionally return or throw errors. One of the primary features of React Router framework is the way it automatically keeps your UI in sync with persistent server state. And this happens in 3 steps. So first, the route loaders provide data to the UI. Then the form posts data to route actions that update persistent state. And then finally, the loader data on the page is automatically revalidated or called again. And you can think of route modules as React components that are already their own API route and already know how to load and submit data to themselves on the server. React Router leverages its nested routing system to optimize load times. So I have a different example here with 2 route modules in one page. And when a URL matches multiple routes, React Router will load the required data and assets for all matching routes in parallel, avoiding request waterfalls. Furthermore, route modules can also export other special functions. So the meta export allows you to add metadata, HTML tags for every route in your app. And they are, of course, important for things like search engine optimization. Then the links function defines which link elements to add to the page when the user visits a route, useful, for example, for style sheets. And then we have this error boundary export that can catch and render UI errors. And we also have client versions of the loader and the action, which is only called on the client. But again, today we're going to focus on the server framework part of React Router. So in this way, React Router in framework mode can scale down, because not every page in your application needs a bunch of JavaScript in the browser, and not every user interaction requires any extra stuff than just the browser defaults. So in React Router, you can build it the simple way first, and then scale up without changing the fundamental model. And additionally, the majority of React Router apps actually work without JavaScript loaded in the browser, which makes React Router very resilient and resilient to bad network conditions. Yeah. And then once React Router has served the document to the browser, it can then hydrate the page with the browser-built JavaScript modules. The process of hydration is an important step for server-side rendered JavaScript applications. It's kind of like watering a dry HTML with water of interactivity and event handlers. And this is the browser framework part of React Router working. So when the user now clicks a link, instead of making a round trip to the server for the entire document and all the assets, React Router simply fetches the data for the next page and then updates the UI. And this has many performance benefits over making a full page request. By the way, a lot of meta frameworks do this as well, not just React Router, but they were early to do this. And it means that assets don't need to be downloaded or pulled from cache. And they also don't need to be parsed by the browser again. And then the data fetch is much smaller than the entire document. So because React Router enhances HTML APIs like anchor and form, your app tends to work even before JavaScript has loaded on the page. React Router also has some built-in optimizations for client-side navigation. It knows which layouts will persist between 2 URLs, so it only fetches the data for the ones that are changing. And a full document request will require all data to be fetched on the server, wasting resources to your backend and slowing down your app. And React Router can also pre-fetch all resources for a page when the user is about to click a link. This is because of that asset manifest that the compiler created. And then React Router will provide client-side APIs, so you can create rich user experiences without changing the fundamental model of HTML and browsers. So if we look back at our first route module from before, here are a few very small but useful UX improvements to the form that we can only do with JavaScript in the browser. You can, for example, disable the button when the form is being submitted. You can focus the input if the server-side form validation fails, or you can, I don't know, like fade in the error message or something. Anything that you need JavaScript to do. And this is what that could look like in code. We can use the browser framework part of React Router, exposed as hooks and components. Here the hook use navigation. We can add a busy variable based on the state of the navigation. We can add an input ref Then we can focus the input ref on error with an effect, use the busy variable to disable the button, and add a fade-in component around the error messages. And what's interesting about this code is that it is only additive. So the entire interaction is still fundamentally the same thing, and even works at a basic level before JavaScript loads. The only difference is that the user feedback will be provided by the app with use navigation instead of by the browser with the spinning fab icon. And because Remix reaches into the controller level of the backend, it can do this seamlessly. And while it doesn't reach as far back into the stack as server-side frameworks like Rails and Laravel, it does reach further, way further up the stack into the browser, okay, to make the transition from the backend to the front end seamless. For example, building a plain HTML form and server-side handler in a backend-heavy web framework is just as easy to do in React Router. But when you want to cross over into an experience with like animated validation messages, focus management, and pending UI, that would require a fundamental change in the code. Whereas in React Router, you can simply add some additional code around the server-side view without changing how it works fundamentally. And the Remix team borrowed an old term called progressive enhancement to explain this. You can start small with a plain HTML form, since React Router scales down, and then scale the UI up when you have the time and ambition. All right, so now that you know how React Router works, we can start coding it for ourselves. But first, let's just see how to create one. So to create it, you would run its npx create command, and this is the top one, to create an app for framework mode. If you're using data mode or declare to mode, you can just create a Vite app and then install React Router. So that's the normal React Router that you are familiar with already. So let's just review what that creates. So the app directory is where all of your React Router app code goes. Then the root TSX file is where you put the root component for your application. The root route module is the only required route module in the application because it's the parent to all the other routes and in charge of rendering the root HTML document. Routes TS is where you initiate your routes. It can either be set to the config-based approach using code or a file-based approach. The file-based way used to be the only option in Remix, but now in React Router v7, they have transitioned to a code-based approach instead. Then we have the app routes directory. And if you're using file-based routing, this is where you have to put your route modules. But if you're using code-based, you're completely free to structure that however you want. You can even rename this folder and then, yeah, move it around. And then we have the React Router config. This is where you define your rendering strategies, as you saw earlier. You can turn off SSR, add static pre-rendering to specific pages. And then we have this interesting folder at the top, React Router, which contains auto-generated route types. We're going to see that in a bit. And we can also see the Vite config. And by default, React Router in framework mode will handle generating the HTTP response for you, as well as hydrate the entire app for you. But if you want to override this behavior, you can run a command to reveal what's happening behind the scenes and get the files entry server TSX and entry client TSX. This is also very nice if you're like starting to learn about SSR and just reading the files. Oh, okay, this is how React is being run on the server and hydrated. It's pretty cool to just see what's happening behind the scenes here. So entry server TSX is the first bit of JavaScript that runs when a request hits your server. So React Router can handle all the necessary data, and you're responsible for sending back the response. And this file renders our React app to a string or stream and sends that as a response to the client. Then the entry client TSX is the first bit of JavaScript that will run when the app loads in the browser. So we use this file to hydrate our React components. Typically, this module uses the React API React DOM hydrate root to hydrate the markup that we already generated on the server in our server entry module. So as you can see here, React Router doesn't try to hide from you what's happening behind the scenes, and even gives you the freedom to change it, which is one thing that makes it very different from other meta frameworks, like, for example, Next.js. All right, so let's move on now to a demo of a real app. And this is going to focus on utilizing the full-stack framework part of React Router, like the server features, showcasing what was at the core of Remix. But again, you can use React Router however you want. So I'm just going to move on to a different page here. Looks good. So this is like a half-completed React Router v7 app. Let's just review what's here first, and then we can finish it together. So I have here all of the boilerplate that you saw in the presentation, Vite config with the React Router plugin, lots of ESLint, prettier stuff. Also the React Router config. I have SSR set to true because I want to have SSR, and I just pre-rendered this homepage. Then inside the app here, we have this routes.ts file, which is where we are going to define all of our route modules in the application. And as you can see, I just have the index, which is what I'm currently on right now. And also notice the .react router folder up here. So this is when I create any route in here, we will get an auto-generated type that we can use to make sure we don't pass any invalid strings or such, and try to navigate to some page that doesn't exist. And then we also have the root TSX. Here you'll see the main document being rendered, so this is required. You need this as a layout. And then it has the special children, and then returns the outlet, which is where all the subroutes are going to be rendered. Then this is all of my route modules here. So let's have a look at, oh yeah, also, I have this error boundary here. So as mentioned, any route module can export an error boundary that can be customized. So this is the root error boundary, so it has a lot of stuff. For example, it's rendering a custom 404 when a 404 has been returned. And we can add this for any route. Let's check out this home route module, which is here. So you'll see here I have the meta export, which is defining my metadata. And I'm just returning a component, just React, JSX. I'm also using the link component, which is enabling client-side navigation on top of my SSR. And notice that I have this error message here, and I'm using this href utility. So this is now the auto-generated types being checked against this path to make sure this is actually a valid route in my application. And this is new in React Router v7. So that's why I have a 404, right? And my href is telling me that this doesn't exist, which is very nice. So let's actually create this notes page, since it doesn't exist right now. And to do that, we would go to the routes.ts, and we can just add another route here. So let's add a new route. I'm going to do notes, routes, notes, and notes TSX. And let's see if that will work. So now I've been able to create this route module and hook it up to a specific file. And that's now this page right here. In this one, I'll have some more JSX, and I'm just iterating over an empty list of notes here. And I have some more errors because I didn't create this page yet. So that's all good. So let's actually fetch the data for this list. And we would do that with a loader. So loaders are on the server. We can talk to our database on the server. So let's export a loader function. And here we can get some notes by calling for example, our ORM. Doesn't have to be a database, of course. Prisma, and then just find many notes. Maybe just order it by when it's updated, and then just return it. And to use this, now being called on the server, we can use it in our component with loader. Whoops. I'm not able to type. Brackets. OK. No! Wait. Has this happened to you before? Wait, now I'm really confused. OK, there we go. I swear this happens every time I do a demo. Forget how to write curly brackets. All right. Well, we can get the loader data. And what we do is use this route export for the specific route module, which is our notes, and then get the component props. So this is now giving us type safety across the server boundary here. We can see the shape of our data from the server by using this auto-generated route type. And then we can say the notes are loader data notes. Loader data notes. Yeah, so now I have, again, this type here, right, coming from my database. And just like that, I can now see the notes from the database inside my list here. Now, what if I wanted to persist this part of the UI across different sub-layouts? Well, that means that this probably needs to be a layout, right? So I can have sub-routes below it. So let's go to the routes and change this to a layout. And layouts don't have a path. They just have a file, like a wrapper. And then it takes in a list of sub-routes. So we can use a prefix utility here to give it a prefix of notes, and then pass sub-routes. And we're going to start with an index routes, which will be just this random note route module, and then wrap that up like that. So this means that we have a layout with a default child. And to actually see this, we need to give it an outlet. So I'm going to add an outlet down here. You might recognize this from regular React router, outlet, like that. So now I have, now I have this index route appearing, and then it will persist across. Well, the layout will persist, even when I change this. So that's the random note here. This has a loader, a little bit more complicated than our simple one. It's finding a random note from our database and displaying it. Just very simple here in a card. And then it also has an error boundary export. So that means that when we have this 404 error status, we can render custom UI instead of breaking the whole app. So let's say that random note is just undefined here. We will throw this 404 and catch it with our error boundary and get this nice UI that we can change to anything that we need. So that's why we have an error boundary there. What about making another route? Let's create the new route here. This doesn't exist right now. So in the routes TS again, we can create a relative route for this layout, which will be a route. And it's going to be new, and it's called just new. Let's see if I can get this to work. There. So now I have a different route here. I have my index, and I have my relative here for the new node. And that looks like this. So there's nothing here right now, almost. It's just a form with an input and a button. And let's try to fill this. So let's do like new. And I get this error now, method not allowed. And that is because there is no action exported from this route module. So there is nothing to call. I'm trying to call this post. There's nothing here that will handle this post, right? So we're going to add that with an action. So we can export an action. And an action takes in a request. And again, we can use the route here from the new, and then get the action props. And then we can get the form data from the request. We can get the title and the content. Let's type these as strings for now. And we can insert it into the database as a new node. So just create new node with that data and content. And that's all we're going to do. And maybe I should find out what I did wrong here. Action args. Yeah, action args. So let's see if it's going to work now. Let's do new, hello. So that just worked by itself. So this is now the route module calling the correct loader to revalidate. So we have this loader running, we post an action, and then it will revalidate the view. So we don't have to do any like React-y like spreading of state, none of that. This is just automatically keeping our persistent server state in sync, which is like one of the reasons that React Router in framework mode is like so smooth to build with. All right, what else should we do on the server? Probably validate our data, right? So let's get a validation result from a node schema. So this is using Zod. It's just like runtime parsing and checking whether this corresponds to a specific schema that I have here, just so we don't add any empty nodes. And let's do a safe parse here of the title and the content. And use this result to insert into our database, like that. And then we need to handle the case where the validation failed, right? So let's do, if the result is not a success, we can return some errors. We're just going to get the result, error, and then flatten this, and then the field errors of that. So we can get this field-specific validation. And also, let's get the created node here and redirect to this once we have created. So there's a redirect function in React Router. It looks like this. You have this redirect from React Router. We have the href utility, which is just for checking type safety. And that's currently failing because this route doesn't exist yet. So that's just a good thing. All right. And now that I'm returning these validation errors, I can use them in my component. Let's get here the action data. Action data. And then we have the route component props again. And the action data will be returned to us once we, or is the return value of the form submission calling the action, returning to the component. So we can use this to display errors. Let's do action data, errors, title. Let's do the same for the text area here, for the content. So now if I have like an invalid note here, you'll see I call my action, and then it returns the validation errors to the field. In this beautiful like circle. I just think of it as a circle, and it makes sense. Right. What else can we do here? Well, we are supposed to be redirecting to this once it succeeds. So let's try to make a successful one. Type something, and we're redirecting to a 404 because it doesn't exist yet. So that's the last route module we're going to add here. Let's go back to the routes and add another route here, which is going to be node ID. And it's going to be called detail, like that. And let's also add one more route here. And I'm going to do what's called a resource route in React Router. So a resource route is a route that just contains some sort of action or loader just for giving a resource to the component. So we're going to use this for handling our delete functionality. So I'm going to need a node ID / destroy here. Destroy. And then add our route module, which is destroy TSX. So I should now be able to navigate through these. That's working. Let's see what's in this route, actually. This is the detail. It has a loader. It's using the params to find the specific node that we're clicking. Then we have an action, which is actually allowing us to favorite this. So we're using the form data here again, just like before. And then we also have this delete button inside the node display, which is the component, which is just a card with our favorite functionality. Let's see that one quickly. So this is using now a fetcher form. This is a browser framework feature where basically we don't, it's like a local form state where we don't push to the URL. We just do it because, of course, this is not a URL update. It's just a favorite. So that's when you use a fetcher form. And finally, we have this form action for the delete, which, wait. I think I missed something. It should be working. Node destroy. Node destroy. let's find out what I did here. OK, it's working. OK, great. Great. Didn't have to debug that one. Nice. So it's working. So it's actually calling the form action with an argument of destroy here, which is calling that resource route. So this is kind of the workflow in React Router. OK, so I think this is all working now, the different functionality in the app. And it feels pretty good. It's fast, right? But I'm just using a local database. So I don't expect any delay here. But in the real world, probably there's some delay when we are calling the server, doing some sort of mutation. Let's make everything a bit slower and see if it still feels fast. Let's make the new route, this action to create a new node, a bit slower. So let's do a slow here. Let's also make the favorite slow. That's inside the detail, inside my favorite component. Ah, my bad. It's actually here. Here, make this slow as well. And let's also make the destroy slow. So everything will be just like more normal now. Depending on the network, depending on the database, everything. Let's see. Not so good anymore, right? Not the best UX. Yeah. So this is something we also should handle. Let's try this. Definitely something we need to handle. So up until this point, we've been using almost exclusively the server features of React Router. And we can start adding in some of the browser framework to solve these UX problems and make it feel more interactive. Yep. I'm just checking what I should be saying here. Yeah, we need to add loading state so we can instantly respond to clicks. Let's begin with the list here. Actually, let's also make that slow. Let's just do a slow here in the loader, like that. So now there is some delay also while clicking this. And I'm going to solve that by adding some loading state. Let's get actually this navigation from use navigation. So this is a hook from the browser framework part of React Router. Navigation. Like that. And then we can say that the loader, or the page is loading when navigation state is loading. This is provided by React Router. So now, when I'm clicking something here, at least I have some UI change. You know, it's not the best, but at least I know that I did, in fact, click this. Let's also add a better state by changing this link to a nav link. And let's get the callback props from this. So we can get some props here. Is active, is pending. And then use this active state to make the list active item blue, and use the pending state to show that we did click it. And let's update this here. So now we have an active state, and we also have a pending state. So it's already feeling a lot more interactive, even though it's still very slow. What about the delete? There's still a delay there. Let's handle that inside the detail route. Let's see the note display here. So this button is the one that's slow to click. So let's get a variable. Note is deleting. So we'll use the navigation once more and get this variable so that when the navigation currently has a form data with the intent to delete, which is matching here, we will say that the route is deleting something, right? We can use this to disable the button. So let's do disabled is deleting. And then we can maybe say, like, it's deleting, you know, something. And let's see if that helps now. OK, at least I have this instant feedback now, right? What about the favorite? It's also slow. This is not really suitable for a loading state, but we can do an optimistic update here. Let's find the favorite component here. And I'm using a fetcher form. And we can also get the fetcher's submission state. So the note is favoriting when the fetcher has a form data in progress and that's favorite is set to true. So we can use this one instead. And just replace these. Very simple optimistic update. So now, at least when I click, it's going to be instant for the click interaction. What about the create? We can actually make this whole creation optimistic. Let's try that as well. That would be in the new. And here, let's do a whole, let's actually get the navigation first. We're going to need that from use navigation again. And then let's just do an optimistic update here. So this is the way you would do it in React Router, the way it's built. You can access the form data again, validate immediately in the client, and just return some UI that kind of simulates that you did. If it succeeds, you can simulate that it's updating right away. So that when I say optimistic, we can get this instant note visual UI, even though it's still waiting for the server. So all of that is feeling better, right? But what's pretty amazing about all of this is that I can actually just disable JavaScript here and try everything. And you'll see I have this default browser favicon, right? This is just the default browser feedback. So JS is disabled. Everything still works. Just like before, we can favorite, delete, we can create new notes. Everything is still the same, but it's just the server framework of React Router. But then, if all is well, we have our JavaScript, we have this now enhanced user experience with optimistic updates, pending states, everything we would want in a regular application. So that's what makes React Router v7 or the framework mode so resilient, because we're just building on top of web standards and adding this client-side features progressively, or called progressive enhancement. And we don't need any use state or use effect. React Router just solves these problems with its own hooks and features. All right, let's get back to the slides. So I mentioned in the beginning of this talk that some of the patterns from Remix, or when Remix was released and slowly has been expanding, have actually appeared in React 19. So these are some examples of that. For example, the use server directive, which is new in React 19, defines server functions, kind of like React Router actions. We have this form component, which lets us call server functions, kind of like React Router forms calling an action. We have the so-called use action state that we can use to get the return value of server functions, very similar to React Router actions returning action data. And then we have use optimistic, which lets us execute optimistic updates, like when we were checking the React Router navigation or fetcher to show optimistic UI. We have use form status, can be used to disable buttons when forms are submitting, like we do in React Router, we use navigation. But what sets these kind of, or what makes them different is that the hooks from React itself are more like a composable and component-bound way to do these things rather than route-bound. So I don't know what I prefer, but there's drawbacks to either and benefits to either. Another example of an overlap between React Router and React 19 is this await component that was created for resolving promises and streaming data with suspense fallbacks. And now with React 19 use, we also have another way to accomplish the same thing. React Router v7 is actually one of the easiest ways to get started with React 19, and you can choose the approach you prefer, if you prefer React Router API or a React 19 API for the same thing. Keep in mind, though, there are alternatives to React Router. It's not something that just solves everything. It, of course, depends on what you're building. So when you're making technical decisions about a product, you should also be considering other meta frameworks, like Next.js and 10-stack Start. 10-stack Start is like arguably a better option when you're building a new single-page application from scratch than React Router. But, of course, React Router can also be incrementally upgraded into, right? And I don't really have time to talk about how to pick a framework. That's like a huge thing, right? But at least I have made this chart that you can take a picture of if you want the key differences between the frameworks. I've tried to find out what's different between them. So if you want to dig deeper, if you're making some sort of decision, I don't want to come here and just make React Router sound like it's going to be the perfect fit for everything, right? But again, it does very much stand out because it can be adopted into from existing React Router apps by upgrading from V6, for example, and then enabling SSR or utilizing server features. And it can also be migrated to from Create React App very easily. And then you can play with the different modes and incrementally utilize more features. So all in all, pick a framework that suits the product you're building, your preferences, and whatever other considerations you might have. All of these frameworks support all the central features that you want from a meta framework, but with certain differences, right? Strengths and weaknesses. And with that, if you would like to see the demo app that we were looking at, you can find it on this link. Just scroll down a little bit. It's going to be there, and you can also see some of my socials there. So again, this is an app that is focusing on the server framework. You don't have to use the server framework. I also have a bunch of resources if you want to read more about what has been happening, or you want to thinking about migrate from React Router. You can see the migration documentation, and they also have like code mods, so you don't have to do a lot of work yourself. It's pretty seamless. Yeah. And they're currently in the process of like migrating everything over to the new website. And if you're interested in verifying and proving your React skills, or you want to learn React best practices, or even advanced topics, the React certification at Certificates Dev is available. And this is a certification that will test your knowledge with questions and coding challenges, and includes also training content that can help you while you're preparing. And this is a certification that I lead the content creation for. Of course, I'm very biased, but I believe it's a great way to increase your knowledge and get validation for your skills. So yeah, I hope you feel ready to build something with React Router or consider migrating. And yeah, you can find me on socials and just ask me on Twitter for any future questions. Thank you.